Hello and welcome to my channel. This video is a tutorial for how I made this interactive frame. I want to first just show the actual end result so that you can get an idea for where it's all headed and see what this is all about and decide whether you actually want to continue watching to see me make this. But essentially this is just a gatefold with a magnetic closure that you can then open to reveal a frame. This is going to be a gift for somebody, so I don't have a photo in there yet, but they'll be able to fold or slide a photo right behind there. So you can they can either put this on a wall, or if they want, I also built in this little display kickstand so that they can put it on a tabletop if they want, and they can decide whether they want to leave the gates open so that the photo is always visible, or keep the gates closed and allow guests to come over and just have that fun little interaction of discovering the photo for themselves by opening the gates. The only thing that I don't show in this video is how I actually attached the gatefold unit to the frame unit. And the reason for that was because I felt like I needed to decide whether I was going to put one of our photos behind here or if I was going to leave it blank so that whoever gets this can put their own photo. And the reason why that felt like a decision I needed to make before I attached this was because, let me show you this is a sample piece. It's just one of the bordered edges cut from white cardstock. So if you look at this piece, there's actually some depth to the inside of this frame. So there's about 1/4 of an inch here that if you were to place the photo or this gate unit, it would actually be recessed in by 1/4 of an inch. But as you can see, I've actually mounted this so that it's flush with just where the bevel ends. So it's actually not inset into the frame. And that solved 2 problems. One, the first problem was that, not really a problem, just, aesthetic. If it was inset down that 1/4 of an inch, the gates would only be able to open perpendicular like this, because they would essentially hit against this flat part right here and then not be able to open beyond that. But by raising it so that it comes right to where the bevel ends, it can actually open much wider because this is such a wide bevel. So I really like that effect because then it really takes advantage of the fact that this is a wide bevel edge. And then the second issue, and this is the bigger one that it fixed, was it just makes getting a photo into the frame here much easier. You can access this a lot easier with it being so much closer to the top of the frame, as opposed to being recessed by that 1/4 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch may not seem like a lot, but the fact that this is so close to that top edge, it was really tough to actually be able to get something out. I think you could have gotten something into the frame fairly easily, but if you ever wanted to switch out the photo, that would have been a bit of a challenge. So by raising this up, it solved both of those issues. And all I did to raise it was just a few layers of corrugated cardboard. You could, cut up a box if you wanted, or use whatever you like in order to just fill in that 1/4 of an inch, and then attach your gatefold unit right at the top where this bevel essentially ends. So that's the only thing that I don't show in this video, but if you want to see how the rest of it's made, please continue watching. So I'm going to start off with the Tonic Studios, one of their beveled edge tailored frames. They actually have 2, and this one is the one that has the wider bevel, and it's called Cool Awning. Now, each set of their tailored frames has basically the one die that will cut and emboss everything, and an optional debossing plate, which will give you that really nice faux wood grain effect and sort of deboss that grain pattern into your cardstock. So really great set of dies. I'm really glad that I got it, and I did get it specifically for this project. I have a separate tutorial on just how to put this frame together, so I will link to that up in the upper right corner, and I'll also leave a link in the description box below. But I am going to assemble it in this video just so that you can get an idea for how one of these goes together. So I have most of my pieces already assembled, but I left one to do on camera with you. And before I get into actually assembling this, though, let me talk about how I figured out the length of each of these frame segments. Now, my frame is going to be a rectangle, so I've got two different lengths and two of each piece. So you want to make sure that when you trim these segments that you make sure they are exactly the same length. That way when everything fits together, it will all be nice and square. So what I realized as I was using this is even though the die does deboss a ruler with some tick marks so that you can actually cut this to length, the measurement on that ruler is actually the outside measurement of your frame. And what I realized was that I would really have liked if there was a way for them to either put another set of markings or something where we would be able to cut it to the length based on what we want the interior size of the frame to be, or the aperture. Because at least for me and this project, I know what I want to be in the center of my frame. So I have a very specific design that I want to build my frame around. And I think a lot of times that's going to be the case. Either you have a specific size photo or a piece of art, and you want to create a custom frame in order to showcase that piece or that photo. So here what I have is just a die cut from one of the Tonic Studios Gatefold Creator Dies, and this is going to be, as you saw earlier, the centerpiece that's going to create that interactive mechanism as well as the photo frame on the inside. So this is the unit that I want to create my frame around. So I have this, and if you're like me and you don't want to necessarily pull out a ruler and do all the math, here's one way of determining the length of segments, frame segments you need. Now, these are two just kind of sample pieces of frame that I've die cut just out of scrap paper, and I just have it held together with temporary tape so that I can flatten this and then just slip it into the storage envelope right alongside my die. And what's nice about having a couple of these around is that you can use it to sort of measure what length you need. So if this is the length that we want to build our frame around, I like to assemble this piece just so that I can actually see, because sometimes it's hard for me to visualize how the frame's going to look until I actually have it in its 3D form. So this is how it would look once it's assembled. And you can see right at the edge of this diagonal kind of mitered line where that bevel ends, that starts the beginning of the interior aperture of your frame. So I'm going to put the piece that I want framed, line it up with that corner right there. And then on the opposite end, at the edge of the piece that I want framed, I'll go ahead and put a little pencil line or a little tick mark. So you can see that right there. So that is one way of determining this so that you don't actually have to measure anything if you don't want. Now, the way that these frame pieces go together is that one end where it's flat here, that will nestle into the frame piece that is perpendicular to it. So it'll ultimately fit in like this. So where we have that first pencil mark, that's going to mark the interior corner of the opposite end. And then we'll start another this segment of frame here. So then all I'm going to do is line up my frame segment with that first pencil mark and give myself a second pencil mark. So that essentially indicates to me how long of a frame piece I will need for this specific project. And what I would recommend doing is once you have that second pencil mark, give yourself an extra 1/4 of an inch beyond that so that when you go to die cut, you have a piece that's slightly longer than what you need, and then you can trim it down to exactly what you need and get a perpendicular, straight, very flush edge when you cut that segment. If you were going to create this exact project where you're framing this specific gatefold, then the outside measurements, if you want to use the tick marks that are actually provided by the die, the outside segment on one of or two of the pieces is 9 inches. That's the longer of the two. And the outside measurement for the shorter of the two is 7 1/8. So you'll have to kind of measure that yourself because there isn't specifically a 7 1/8 tick mark that the die will deboss into your card. So I have already done all of my die cutting, and I've got my 3 segments already assembled here. And as I mentioned, before you actually glue all of your pieces together, you do want to make sure that you trim off that flat end, the one that's opposite from the glue tab, and have that be nice and flush and 90 degrees. And that way all of your frame segments will fit in together and they'll square up in the corners. So that's a very important step. Sometimes I've forgotten that, and then things end up a little wonky at the end. Okay, so I'm going to set these 3 aside and kind of speed up this portion. Now the die does already has some debossed lines that are scored for you, but I'm going to go ahead and reinforce those score lines on my scoreboard because I want the score lines to be even deeper, and I want my folds to be nice and crisp. So from the front, I'm going to go ahead and rescore all of those lines, but I'm leaving this one score line that's between the 2 columns with those hash marks, and I'm going to score that from the back. And that's because that's the only valley fold. The rest of the score lines are going to be mountain folds. And usually when you score a line, you want to mountain fold that line, and that way you kind of get a really nice crisp fold, and it also kind of keeps the strength of your cardboard. So those 2 columns where we've got the little hash marks, you are going to be gluing those 2 ends or sides together. And I am using a liquid PVA glue. It's from Lineco pH Neutral. It's my favorite PVA glue. And that piece that we just glued together, that's sort of a support beam. As you can see here, it's going to kind of hold up the edge of our frame right there. So I'm going to put some double-sided adhesive right over the score line because that's where we want our little support beam to actually get adhered to. And in later I've made a couple more frames after this, and so I've instead of just putting a little bit of liquid glue adhesive, as you saw there, I've actually just started to run an entire line of liquid adhesive down that score line so that it does end up being a very, very nice permanent bond. And then I've started to just let that actually completely dry before moving on to this step. But you don't necessarily have to take those precautions, but I found that support beam moves a lot less, especially since I'm trying to burnish by sliding my bone folder right into the frame. And that has a tendency to kind of knock that support beam around a little bit. So here's how to actually put your 4 frame segments together. And again, if you're finding that I'm going too fast, I do have a separate tutorial on just how to put these frames together. So feel free to check that one out. It's not sped up nearly as much as this one is. So one thing to keep in mind is that you, especially if you're making a rectangular frame like I am, you want to make sure that you have the lengths of frame segments alternating. So you want long, short, long, short. And you just want to put some liquid adhesive on the glue tab and on the segment that has the extra cardstock hanging off. And then you want to slide that straight edge piece right inside. When it comes to adding the last segment, I like to just put glue on both sides at the same time. And the nice thing about using a liquid adhesive is that you do get a little bit of wiggle room time. So you can take your time just kind of nudging these 2 ends in place. And you could use your the grid lines on your grid mat, if you have one, to actually make sure that all of your corners are a nice 90 degrees. They should be if all of your segments are cut accurately. Now I'm going to back my frame with some 110-pound cardstock. This piece is cut to 7 inches by 8 7/8, and it's just going to be just shy of the outside measurement of our frame. And I didn't want to cut it exactly to the outside measurement of the frame, just so that I don't have to worry about any overhang and having to trim off anything. So I cut it just a smidge smaller than the actual size of the full frame. That will neaten up the back and as well give us something to attach our centerpiece onto. So moving on to the centerpiece, as I mentioned, I'm using the Tonic Studios, or one of the Tonic Studios Gatefold Creator Die sets, and this is the largest die in the die set, which cuts the if you were making a gatefold card, for example, this would essentially be your card base with the gatefold and everything included. So you can see here that fits perfectly inside. And you can see what I was talking about earlier, where putting this all the way inset into the frame only allows the gate to open perpendicular to the back of the frame. So after I finished filming this tutorial, and I was thinking about how to finish it off and whether or not to include a photo, the thought occurred to me that, maybe I won't inset it and instead raise it. So that came sort of as an afterthought, which is why I didn't include it in the filming. The Gatefold Creator die set does come with all of these decorative mats and layers, and so I've just cut it out of, I think the back portion is cut out of Centura Pearl from Crafter's Companion, and the front detailed gate is cut out of Tonic Studios. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's that specialty card that it's gold and it's got the little vertical stripes. I think it's one of their silk specialty cards. I'll try to find it and leave a link to it in the description box below. This little lock piece came in the My Memory Books Perfect Locks die set, and I'm not using it as a sliding lock mechanism, but if you're interested to see how that locking mechanism works, I do have a separate tutorial on just that as well, so I'll link to that in the upper corner and in the description box below too. So I'm just gonna continue to decorate this gatefold piece. I'm gonna decorate both the outside of the gate and the inside of the gate. And the way that the gatefold is designed, you can see there's that little notch there that in a little rounded rectangle that is die cut out from the center of the gates. And that is meant as a place where you can actually add a ribbon closure, but I actually won't be using a ribbon closure. I'll be using a magnetic closure, as you saw earlier. The gatefold die set also comes with these frame dies, and so you get the bubble or the shadow layer that's sort of a backer plate for the frame, as well as the decorative frame and the inner aperture die to cut out an aperture from that really pretty decorative frame piece. So, and then beyond that, there's even a couple more nested frame dies that are even smaller and can fit within there too. So this die set really does come with a lot. So I have that cut out of some gold pearlescent paper, the same as my frame, but I'm going to pause it here just so that I can talk through this piece. This piece I've die cut the same frame die from just plain white cardstock, 100-pound cardstock, and I've die cut it 3 times. Once as the full design, so all the way around all 4 edges, and twice more, but just around the 3 edges, leaving the top edge off. And the reason for that is that the extra layers are going to be kind of like spacers, so that there's room for you to slide a photo behind the front of the frame, and it won't be like a super tight fit because of those 2 extra layers of cardstock that run around along the 2 sides and the bottom. The reason for die cutting one of the extra layers entirely, all 4 sides, is to actually just reinforce the entire frame piece, because the top of that is going to get maybe a little bit of kind of wear and tear just from sliding photos in and out. Most people, I think, once they pick a photo and they put one in, they probably won't be changing it out, but you never know. So you just want to make sure that it's nice and strong and it's reinforced, because the pearlescent paper that I'm using, it's only 80 pounds, so it's not a super thick cardstock. So by backing that with another piece that is 100-pound, it gives it a little bit of extra strength. So I'll start off by attaching a piece of acetate to this frame, and that just gives you just this nice glossy, kind of shine, like it, as if it was an actual photo album. That piece of acetate I cut to 3 1/8 by 5 inches. And I forgot to mention, so I did use Cosmic Shimmer, and one of the metallic polishes to actually put a gold edge around my white cardstock, because I didn't want that white to kind of stand out. And I guess I was being a little bit conservative with my pearlescent gold paper here, because ideally you would probably cut those extra layers from the exact same paper as your topmost layer, and that way everything looks solid and exactly the same. But instead, I just chose white cardstock, so I had to figure out how to get those edges to not look quite so stark and white. And it wasn't too hard to just run some of that polish. If you had maybe a gold metallic marker, you could use that as well. It's not an exact match to my gold pearlescent paper, but I actually kind of like it. It kind of has that sort of gold gilded effect. You do also want to make sure that if you end up getting any glue on your acetate, like as I have, to go ahead and let that dry and then just use a gum eraser um, to rub off that adhesive, because once this is glued down to that backing plate, you're not going to be able to wipe off anything that is behind the acetate. So you just want to make sure that all of that's cleaned off nicely. Now, when I adhere this, I'm actually only going to put adhesive on the decorative edge of the frame, and not on sort of the straight edge that's right inside the aperture. And the reason for that is just to give a little bit of extra room so that when you slide a photo behind here, that it can actually fit behind the frame itself and not so exactly within the visible area. And I think that way it'll frame the photo a little bit nicer. So now that I have that all done, I've just gone ahead and glued that down. And I did end up actually making another gold frame after I finished filming, mostly because the one that I created in this video, as you saw, it was actually just a little bit loose. Like my gatefold unit was, as you saw, kind of sliding around a little bit. But when I decided that I was actually going to raise the gatefold so that I was adhering it flush with the bottom of the bevel, I didn't need that extra wiggle room in order to open the gates. So I actually made another frame that was closer in size. So, with this locking mechanism, now you're going to see me, I'm not going to really explain this part because I didn't actually end up needing to do this because I started off using these really small magnets. They're only 3/16 of an inch, and it just wasn't strong enough to hold the gates together. So you don't need to do this business of kind of embedding the magnet within this piece of cardstock here. This little half lock here, you do want to create those pieces. So that's basically a full lock that I just cut in half, and I glued the two halves together. So it's actually two thicknesses of cardstock. And that's because I want a nice, clean, professional edge on the outside and on the inside of the gate. And because there's so many layers of cardstock, decorative layers on the gatefold, I need some extra layers of the lock that hangs off of the gatefold in order for everything to look as flush as possible. Now, I actually have 5 layers of cardstock because the matte and layer of the decorative, that's 2 layers for the front, 2 layers for the back, and then we have the gatefold base, which is another layer. So technically, you could actually fit maybe 4 layers of just the half piece of lock, and that would make everything a little bit more flush if you've got all of the same mats and layers that I have. But I found at least having the 2 helped somewhat. And the other reason to do this is also because I need to hide my magnets somewhere. So because these gates meet up right in the center, there's no overlap, so there's nowhere for the magnet to go. So you need to have something that overlaps in order for a magnetic closure to actually work. So here I'm just going to line up my locking mechanism or the lock die cuts so that they exactly overlap each other. That way when they're closed, it does look like one lock. Now, this does kind of break logic a little bit because you wouldn't have the lock on both sides of the gate. But but it's what I need in order to get the magnetic closure to work. So what I've done is I've already embedded the magnet on one side, and I've got its pair on the just stuck to it, and then I put some score tape on that, and when you close it, it'll go precisely in the right location so that it will meet up with its pair on the other side of the lock. So here's where once I have everything down, I realize, oh, that magnet is not strong enough to hold together all of these, all of that tension really in the gatefold. So then I went ahead and chose a larger magnet, and sometimes doubling up on your magnets can be enough, but in this case, it wasn't. So I actually had to pull up the the lock, the back piece here, and you can see my cardstock tore a little bit, but I had to add another magnet on the opposite side too. So now I have two that are the same size, and then that worked out just great. So that's the other nice thing about using a liquid glue. So as you saw, I was still able to lift it. It tore my cardstock a little bit, but no one's going to really see that. And so in the end, I did make it work, and that size magnet worked out just fine. Initially didn't think that I would need such a large magnet, but you really should just try to use the largest magnet that makes sense, because it's ultimately just easier in the end to just do it the one time really, and not have to lift up your mats and layers. And once I have this all done, I'm just going to use my gum eraser to kind of pick up any dried glue that I might have. And that's essentially my centerpiece complete. Now, for the little kickstand, what I've done here is I've just cut a little piece that the exact measurement isn't too important. I just made sure to cut something that was more than halfway tall and more than halfway wide, because this is actually just a piece of scrap that I'm using. And the only reason for the angled cuts is just to make it look a little bit nicer. And I have another piece of black 110-pound cardstock that I'm gonna put to actually hide that little glue flap there. And I do have just some temporary low-tack tape. It's just painter's tape. And I am putting that on my glue tab so that I can test this out. So you can see how the bottom angle is the important one. So you can see how once that's adhered, the bottom angle will actually govern how far back your frame leans backward. So the more severe of an angle, the more your frame is going to lean backwards. And so you can kind of just make that determination based on what looks good to you, on what you would prefer. The top angle that I've cut there, that's just to make it look a little bit nicer, a little bit different. So I'm actually going to trim this off a little bit. So I'm going to trim from the corner here where my glue tab starts, and I'm going to increase the angle and just slice off a little bit starting from that bottom corner there. And I just continued to take small slices off of this bottom edge until I found something, an angle that I liked. So I'm gonna line up this bottom edge right here with where I know my blade is going to cut, and you can do this on a guillotine as well. And so just trim off that little bit. That just makes for a more severe angle at the bottom there, and that will allow the frame to actually lean backwards more. So once you find an angle that you like, then you can go ahead and glue that little, it's just a little 1/2-inch glue tab. So I go ahead and just glue that down. So you can see that if the black piece there is just under 9 inches tall, my little display kickstand is probably around 5.5 inches, and the width of the frame is around 7.1/8 to be exact. So the width of my little kickstand there is around 4.5. So those are just some rough measurements. And again, so I'm going to use, I've learned my lesson. I'm just going to go ahead and use the larger magnets. And so I attached it first to my kickstand, and then put my 2 magnet pieces together with some double-sided, some score tape on it, and then just closed it down so that it adhered right where it's supposed to line up or match up against the back panel. And then I'm going to glue my second 110-pound piece of black cardstock right over top of that, so that gives it a nice finished edge. It hides that one magnet, and it hides the glue tab on the kickstand. And so that's basically the project complete, except for adhering the gatefold unit to the frame. So as I explained, all I did there was just layered up some corrugated cardboard and I think a piece of foam as well. So you can see here, it's a little hard to get that to slide into the frame. And I think my suspicion is if I had one in there and I tried to take it back out, it would be really hard, especially since the top of the decorative frame is so close to the top of that inside border of our actual frame. So that is this project complete, and as you can see, it stands up. You can open it, and this is, I think the way I designed it is so that it actually stays closed, but I like attaching it so that it can actually open wider, and when you have it on display, you can actually leave the gates open if you want, just for something different. But you can see here, I can't bend that gate any further than that. And so I really do recommend, taking that extra time to kind of fill in that inset and attach your gatefold piece that way. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it's a long one. If you enjoyed it, please do consider liking, commenting, and sharing. And if you did like this video, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you can get a notification whenever I post new videos to my channel. Thank you again, and until my next video, happy crafting and have a fantastic day. Bye!